Daniel Akroyd's Revenge. Chapter 4. Young Daniel Ackroyd rose early on the Tuesday morning. By 5:25 he breakfasted on Waterloo porridge, enjoyed a cup of tea, and stole out of the house with his bag of baggins and his work apron, careful not to wake his father. It was raining. The dark gritstone slabs of the pavement glistened in the dim, early morning light. He pulled his felt hat over his eyes and vowed to save up for an oilskin cape or one of the new rubber-coated garments invented by Macintosh, now being manufactured from waste material at Burley's mill by the Scot. He'd to be at his workbench by 6, and it was a good 1.5 miles away. All was quiet, save for the staccato noise of his own iron-shod clogs ringing out on the broken flags, and the occasional sound of others echoing in the distance. Apart from this, the sound of running water, dripping and gurgling, predominated. It dripped off cracked slates and blocked up gutters, gurgled down the outside and inside of broken drain pipes, dripped off the brim of his hat, soaking the shoulders of his fustian jacket and the knees of his trousers in the process. Above all, it dripped out of the sky in great big cold lumps of soot-laden acidic rain, dirtying and defiling everything it touched as it did so. He took great care to avoid the rotting vegetable matter on the pavement, not wishing to find himself flat on his arse. A typical Manchester autumn day, the lad thought to himself, and I'm not prepared. He made his way on to Great Ancoat Street. Past the junction of Oldham Street and Oldham Road, the highway narrowed to a lane, fronted by broken-down shops, with murky windows, and a couple of disreputable beerhouses. Turning down Shoedale, he noticed the gas lighting already lit in John Doherty's boot shop and coffee house, but there was no sign of Irene Rose's old mentor. The town was fast waking up, and his clogs were now just one pair out of many ringing out on the pavements. The rumble of ironclad wheels of carriers' carts, and the sound of heavy shiers' hooves on stone sets, echoing off the dirty brick walls lining the narrow streets, joined them as they ferried goods to and from the nearby Victoria station of the Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway Company. Passing behind the old collegiate church, he took a short-cut through the churchyard. From here, Blackfriars Bridge would take him over the Irwell, its waters shrouded in fog, into Salford and on to Garden Lane and the Salford Ironworks. As he reached the bridge, for one eerie, ghostly moment, the piercing whistle of a steam locomotive banished all other sound. Daniel wasn't the only one up early that morning. Young Constance, who normally loved to lie in, and often only arose from her slumbers after Irene Rose had set young Bess and her comrade in arms, little Faith, to the task of rudely removing her eiderdown and soft lambswool blankets, was already having her breakfast, keen to get to Mary Upton's and assist in the nursery. James already had the pony and trap outside the stables waiting for her, although to be fair to Constance, she'd offered to walk to Ancoats. Grace had insisted it was too dangerous for the 12-year-old to be out so early on her own. Despite the girl's protest, she'd be 13 next May, and 12-year-old mill workers weren't mollycoddled. Grace smiled at her young mistress's use of this particular word, and wondered if she'd started taking language lessons from Bess, or if she'd picked it up from young Daniel. Either way, it was nice to hear her beginning to speak properly again. As a 3-year-old, when Constance had first moved into the family, she'd spoken the language of the poets as her first and only language, but over the years she'd taken on middle-class airs and graces, to the point where she had more airs than old Father Time had whiskers. "Good morning, Constance. What are you doing here so early in the day?" Rosa Joseph, obviously more than pleasantly surprised, beamed at the youngster as she wiped her hands on her clean white apron. "Mary Upton said she needed help, so here I am," Constance responded. "Good a girl. I'm on me own, apart from Bella and Amy. Mary's a-gonna see how some of the bambinos are. Have a cup of tea, and then we boil some more milk ready for the little uns." Amy Redbank, or rather Peduzzi, took a plate out of the sink and placed it on the draining board, picked up a towel and wiped the suds off her hands. "I'll pour the tea. I reckon we all need one." At that moment the sound of a baby crying emerged from Mary's living room. "That's a lie old Job's skriking," Rosa said. "He'll whack her all up." The Italian grabbed a titty bottle full of milk from the larder and quickly retreated into the nursery. Amy laughed before turning back to Constance. "Sit thyself down, Connie. It's good to see you, and we need your help in Mary being away. She's well fretting about this cholera. If it's not one thing come to either us, it's t'other. What can I do to help, Amy? I'll do whatever I can." The young woman glanced up from pouring the tea, a mischievous smile briefly flitting across her face. "Art thou any good at changing and washing soiled thingamajigs?" she asked, straight-faced. "I do it all the time," Constance said with a grin. Amy knew it couldn't be true, but admired the youngster's attitude. The mill owner's granddaughter decided to have a word with Bella as soon as she finished her tea. Sure she'd have no problem removing a soiled thingamajig, or even washing it. The problem was replacing it. It had been a long time since Faith and Benjamin wore one, and when they'd moved to the Heatherose, Irene Rose had given the job to Michael. "Now then, young Daniel, how art thou doing?" "All right, I think, Mr. Mather." Daniel looked up from his vice and placed his bastard file on the bench, much surprised to hear his employer's voice, let alone his question. He looked at William quizzically. The manufacturer picked up one of the two finished spanners laid on the bench and examined it closely with a practised eye. It felt smooth to his grip and well balanced. "It's very handsome, Daniel, but they are spending a fair bit of time removing metal, aren't they?" He gazed at the lad, his face giving nothing away. Daniel wondered if he was being critical. Young William watched, wondering how Daniel would react. "I want to make them comfortable to use, Mr. Mather. That's why I'm taking care to round off all the sharp edges." "Aye, but it takes time, and time's money. My money. You could use gloves when thou art unfastening a difficult nut or bolt to protect your hands. Most workers are just chamfer th' edges and not round 'em off and put such high polish on their metal. They're only tools at the end of the day." Young William picked up the other spanner, examining it carefully. He liked what he saw, but didn't say a word, eager to hear Daniel's explanation. "Wearing gloves doesn't allow the kind of delicate touch you need, Mr. Mather. They slow the job down, soon wear out, and gloves cost money," Daniel asserted quietly but firmly. "I thought I'd better spend time now and make sure they're right. I'm going to have to use 'em for the rest of me working life." William Mather smiled. "I bet our William put you up to this?" Young William laughed. "I didn't, feyther. I saw what Daniel was doing, and he were doing it right, so I left him to it." He brandished the other spanner in his hand. "Daniel takes pride in his work, feyther, and I know how William examine the beauty of the line and curve, the combination of art with strength. If it looks right, it is right. You keep on telling me, and I'm sure you're right. You usually are." He put his hand on his son's shoulder, gripping it with obvious affection, and more than a touch of pride. "Even if you are bloody annoying with it at times." He turned his attention back to Daniel. "Good lad, me and thee'll get on right gradely." With that he turned on his heel and went to have a chat with Bill Holland. Young William grinned at Daniel. "Me feyther's a man of few words," he informed his fellow apprentice, "but he admires craftsmanship and hates yes-men and bullshitters. I reckon you passed the first test, Daniel Ackroyd. You stuck by your guns in your own quiet way and told him why you were taking the trouble you were. Dad'll like that, even if it is costing him money." Daniel smiled and nodded, but remained silent, turning his attention back to the job in hand. Nonetheless, he had a warm glow inside. He was beginning to feel at home, and had the strong idea he and young William would become good mates. Not so bad, really, he thought. It was only his second day in the strange new world of work. Constance had also enjoyed her day. She'd always related well to younger children, and she'd had plenty of scope for displaying her talents at the nursery. The children ranged in age from a few weeks up to 4 years. From 4 years of age up to 15, the children now attended a school in a new outbuilding attached to Mary's kitchen and funded jointly by Gibraltar Mill and the Co-op. To Rosa and Bella's delight, she carried out her fair share of thingamajig changing and washing, and proved she had a natural talent for entertaining the toddlers and other children. Irene Rose had turned up at 4 with the intention of taking her daughter home, thinking she'd be tired, but Constance had insisted on staying until the mill workers picked their children up in the evening. Daniel Ackroyd Sr. had turned up at 6 to pick up food for young Daniel's evening meal, and Constance insisted they take him to his home in the Pony and Trap. Irene Rose had assumed Constance wanted to see Daniel, which of course she did, but she equally wished to visit their home and the area in which they lived, having never been in the house. Mary Upton had also returned. She'd been to the isolation hospital with Dr. K, and reported that the doctor felt they'd nipped the chance of a cholera epidemic in the bud. None of the children had developed any of the symptoms, and only 2 of the parents had displayed any sign of fever. Luckily, both enjoyed basic good health, and he was sure they'd recover. On Dr. K's orders, the sanitation police had thoroughly cleansed the cellar where the old woman had died and made it inaccessible. They'd inspected all the houses in the surrounding area, and the interior walls were now being lime-washed where necessary. Irene Rose, looking to the future, had an eye on the forthcoming municipal elections next spring. She'd asked Dr. K if he'd be willing to talk about the health issues involved and basic means of prevention workers in the area could take if she was to organise a series of public meetings. She'd told him she was sick and tired of the corporation's excuses and intended to rally support to tackle the problems prevalent in the locality. The good doctor readily agreed and suggested he should draw leaflets providing advice on basic hygiene they could have printed and distributed. Although she didn't inform him at the time, she had plans to ensure the Chartists stood their own candidates in the elections. Irene Rose already had one supporter of the Charter in mind, a local ratepayer and therefore entitled to stand. Moreover, he was a highly successful and widely respected businessman, a man of principle she could trust implicitly, her own father. Thanks to the undemocratic multiple vote system for multiple properties subject to rate payments, 2 votes were in the bag already, his own. All she had to do was persuade him to stand. She decided to take the children into her confidence. Constance would no doubt be a major ally. She could wrap Matthew around her little finger. With young Bess and little Faith as part of the team, the outcome was obvious.